Hello again. So today we're going to be painting together a landscape with palette knife. And painting landscape is not always about copying the image you've taken on your holiday. Of course, you can paint extremely realistic description of the image and we can certainly do that in another video. But sometimes you just like to be creative, fast and more expressive, creating more emotional and energetic artwork. And palette knife is just the tool for that. It steers you away from too much detail, keeps the colors crisp and clean. And so let's start and let me help you to understand the process. The photo was taken just before sunset, but I have been there and saw the beautiful sunset changing the colors and mood of the landscape. And that is what I remembered and wanted to capture in this artwork. The composition was important. In order to give the painting more energy and interest, I decided to use long and narrow canvas. After preparing the canvas with 2 coats of gesso, I kept the drawing to absolute minimum using dark grey pastel pencil. As usual, wherever and whenever possible, I stick to using just primary colors and black and white. If you like to become good at mixing colors, I do urge you to do the same. You can always have a look at my color mixing videos for more information. So to create this beautiful landscape, all I needed was 5 colors and non-porous palette to mix the colors on, and palette knife for mixing, and couple of palette knives for painting, and probably one palette knife would be enough, sufficient for that as well. I always take my time to pre-mix my basic colors. Usually I mix 2 or 3 colors for dark values, 2 or 3 for mid-tone values, and some for the light. If necessary, I will intermix between them while I'm working, and I can always create another variations of the colors from these basic mixes. I would also recommend for the total beginners to do an underpainting in one darker color. Most of the landscape will start with the sky and continue with the bushes or other parts of the landscape, working from the background to the foreground or from the back to the front. So my rule for the background of the painting is to keep the paint thinner by controlling the amount of paint on my palette knife, and if necessary, scraping it slightly away. The first layer of palette knife doesn't need any medium, so please do not use any. This painting is about sunset, therefore the sun is low to the horizon, so I place a richer, stronger color towards the horizon and lighter color towards top of the sky. This painting is done in one sitting, so while still wet, I started with the bushes, connecting them to the sky. Notice that I'm starting the bushes from the ground up towards the sky. I'm working with the darker colors first and lighter colors connecting to the sky and mixing the colors together. The dark value represents shadows and lighter values picking up on the light from the sky. All of the colors has to be working wet into wet, of course. As I reach the sky, I blend the colors a little bit more, keeping the edges very soft. There shouldn't be any detail or sharp edges on that distance. I'm not trying to bring any attention to this part of the painting. So notice the strokes of the palette knife. When using the darker colors at the bottom of the bushes, the strokes are bolder and larger. And as I'm going up into the sky, I'm using the tip of the palette knife with very little of paint and short strokes to create an impression of leaves and air between the branches. Some dark colors, actually the same dark color, is used for the bottom and shadow sides of the rocks. Again, I'm starting the rocks with the dark colors and work towards the light colors. Bold and larger strokes first and short detailed strokes last. It is important to decide right at the beginning where is the light coming from and be consistent with it. I keep assessing the work as I paint my way down the canvas, and if necessary and while the paint is still wet, I go back to correct it or enlarge something or add more detail. There is nothing better than working and learning with me in the studio, but for those who can, this video could be the second best. Don't be discouraged if your hands and palette knife doesn't work as well as mine. Don't forget, I have done many paintings this way, and you may just start at your first palette knife landscape, so be patient with yourself. Keep trying, and it will get better with each artwork. Also, most of this video is on double speed. It took about 6 hours to finish this painting. So I'm slowly working my way to my mid-tone color, adding them to the bushes. I keep away from the light colors as long as possible. They could make a real mess out of your dark colors, so if you use them too early, you can end up with grays. So you're slowly working from dark to the mid-tone, and then over the mid-tone you can go lighter again, and over that you can go the lightest. So the painting, therefore, looks very dark at the beginning, and it stays like that for quite a while. Each time you add another color, you're creating more three-dimensional feel to the bushes or to the objects in your painting. And at the end, finally, I will add the last light colors and few more lines for the branches and tree trunks. And when that happens, notice that one stroke of the light and it all becomes alive. So be decisive with the light. One stroke in the right place is enough if you are working wet into wet like me. If you find it too hard, leave it for the second layer when the paint is dry, because it's very easy to make your colors muddy. If you add your light too soon, you will overmix them with the dark values, you will be in trouble. But just let it dry, go away from it, and on the second go you can always fix it. So the same process continues throughout the whole painting. You can now see me working on the ground and the reflections in the puddle, using the again dark values first and working my way to the light. Lighter I go, more careful I am with placement of the colors and shapes. It is really the light that creates the detail. So lighter you go, more careful you have to be, shorter the strokes and more decisive the strokes. Keep the paint a little bit thinner, not too thick. Too much paint in the background will be creating you a little bit of a problem. They will be overmixing and muddying the painting. So less paint to create the background, because you know you're gonna and especially when you're using the darker colors, start with the less paint on your palette knife, because you know you will be putting other color over it, and other color again and again. So you need to keep the thickness for the light colors, not for the dark colors. So the placement of the light, as you can see me doing now, is really, really important. And I'm not going over that placement several times. I'll place the color and leave it be. Only if I don't like it, only if I want to get rid of it, I'll go over it again, touching it again so it mixes with the color underneath. But if I like the light, it has to stay where it is. So finally, I'm ready to start on the rocks. So this is my focal point of the painting. Therefore, there will be more attention on the shapes, details, and chroma of the color, clarity of the color. The whole work took about 6 hours of beautiful and relaxing painting, and most of the time I devoted to these rocks and the immediate reflections on the water under them. It is quite important that you make enough paint when you start mixing your colors. Palette knife uses much more paint than brushes. But then again, with the brushes you may be doing 3 or 4 layers in some places, or sometimes even more. But with the palette knife you try to finish your work almost on one go. The second layer is usually only refining your a few places, just adding few lights and darks and brights. So mixing a lot of color will help you to have those colors throughout all the time that you're painting, or the one session that you actually working. So that first layer with palette knife is the most important and almost fine layer. So being decisive and using the color and having them pre-mixed saves the time. You do not have to stop and start mixing another bit of color here and there, and keeps the it keeps the harmony within the colors. If you constantly mixing another lot of color, you're probably losing the plot, and not only that you will find difficult to mix the same colors, but you're also interrupting that process of painting where you're concentrating on placement and balance within the shapes and colors by trying to mix another lot of colors. So you know, I mix enough to work with. You can always adjust the chroma, the clarity or brightness of the color during the work by adding the pure colors to the pre-mixed colors on your palette. By pure colors, I definitely mean primary colors. So you can see that the colors are slightly changing as I'm working on those rocks. They're becoming more vibrant, which ensures that the attention to this part of the painting is kept. Now, round shapes of the rocks are very difficult to do with palette knife. They can be created, of course, by placing several strokes next to each other, following the shape of that curve, compared to the brush where you make just one stroke and you create a curve, palette knife seems to be a little bit more difficult, but the colors don't overmix. The colors stays vibrant, so you can do all things all at once. So it's got a beautiful quality. You have seen also my my palette again, and you could see that there is much more colors now than before. There are different values and different intensity of the colors. But I keep the basic colors all the time, at least a little bit. If I change one color, I keep a little bit of the old colors next to it, so I can always go, you know, return to the previous parts of the painting and tie the colors together for greater balance and color harmony. Painting the small rocks is fiddly, but the variation of sizes is important in your painting. Nothing is worse than a repetition in the painting that kills the painting. Keep the variation in sizes and shapes going by using the movement of your hand and varied placement of colors with palette knife. And now again you can see me how I'm placing the lighter color on the rocks, and it's a one stroke and it's there. Only if you want to mix the colors a little bit, you go a few times over it. Now very soon I will be painting the reflections, and I'd like you to be aware that the reflections are not affected by the light like shadows. They fall directly below the object. They are mirror image of the object. If the color of the object is dark, the reflection is just one shade lighter. So as you can see, I will be placing the colors directly under the rocks and scraping it down to elongate the reflection. So I want you to remember that the darker color reflects in the water slightly lighter, and lighter colors reflects slightly darker. So I'm still painting the rocks, I'm still fiddling with the light color, which is a very important, and notice how it is on one side. So dark is on my left and light is on my right and towards the top of the rocks. And I'm trying to keep that consistent across a whole painting on all of the rocks. And as I've painted the lighter colors, my color was thicker. So because it is the last color on those rocks, I can afford to put more paint there. And especially if I want to have that part of the painting as my focal point, more texture I put there, more noticeable it will be. So the texture attracts attention to the painting. So you don't place the texture in your sky if you don't want the sky to be the focal point of your painting. If the rocks are focal point, then the rocks will have the thicker paint. So now I'm on my reflections, and as usual I'm starting with the darker colors directly under the rocks. I'm placing the color and I'm dragging it down to create a longer reflections. I'm using the palette knife vertically and horizontally to create that more blended look. So the reflections are joining the rest of the water with vertical strokes of palette knife, and I'm slightly blurring them together, making sure that the yellow and blue will not mix into greens. I'm also at some point starting to add horizontal strokes of light. That section where colors dramatically changing from darker to lighter and from one color to different color, you will need to be really aware of the mix you can get. If you find this stage difficult again, you can wait until the one part dries and then join the other part to it next time. But I do believe that working wet into wet is more energy. It creates more energy and more interesting work. So it is all about learning which color will what will happen if I mix this color with that color. So learning about the colors is one of the most important parts of the painting. So go and have a look at that video about the colors and try to understand it. It will really, really change the way you paint. Colors that are next to each other on the color wheel will not be any problem. They are harmonious, they go well together. So on the bottom part of my water there are colors that are adjacent to each other on color wheel, which is a yellow and a ochre color and a brown colors and orangey colors. So they all connected, so there is no problem. You only have to be aware of that yellow and blue and try not to overmix those two colors together too much. My blue's got a little bit of a red in it, so it's a little bit of a purpley blue there, and my yellow's got also a little bit of red in it, so it's a orangey yellow. And I'm very careful how I apply those two colors next to each other. For the larger section of colors at the bottom, I'm using a larger palette knife. So larger the painting, larger the palette knife, smaller the details, smaller the palette knife. So it's always handy to have several different palette knives available to you. I also keep my eye on the overall effect, adjusting and adding colors wherever I need them. So you may see me working for a little while at the bottom and then coming back to the top or to the rocks, placing some of those colors into other part of the painting to keep that harmony between the colors all the time happening. I'm also coming back with the end of the blade and dragging the color horizontally to create the effect of small water drifts and light reflections on them. Of course, in order to be able to do that, both of the colors has to be wet. So if I want to drag one color into another, I need both colors to be wet. So here you see a nice detail of that reflection of the water there, just under the rocks. So that was the part that I really wanted people to look at, and therefore there was more detail there. So the last two colors are added diagonally, and you can see that purpley brown and that red orange, they slightly diagonal against the vertical lines of the water that I've put before. They giving another energy to the painting. I used a big palette knife for that. I put those two colors, all the colors actually are wet into wet, and then I softened them. I used a badger brush and I gently run the badger brush or softener over those colors and blur them a little bit together. Reason for that was I didn't want to have any sharp, hard edges at the bottom of my painting, because it would draw attention to itself, and I want to keep the attention where the rocks are, not at the bottom of my painting. So if you haven't got a badger brush or some fancy brush, any very soft haired brush will do. So here you see the painting details of the painting. It's finished and it dried, and it has been varnished at the end. So I hope you learned a lot, and and you will try it yourself to paint a beautiful landscape. And please do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you again. Goodbye.